informal sessions to prepare. The Border Patrol says arrests at the U.S.-Mexico border are down 25% since President Joe Biden announced new asylum restrictions 2 weeks ago. New figures show arrests in May also fell by 9%, making it the third lowest month during the Biden presidency. Mortgage rates falling for the third straight week to the lowest level in almost 3 months. The standard 30-year fixed rate mortgage averaged 6.87% for the week ending June 20th. That's down from a 2024 peak of 7.22%. Still, mortgage rates remain higher than anything seen in the 10 years before 2022. Those are your headlines. Now here's a look at your weather on the ones.
I'm meteorologist Julie Marquez, and today in Milwaukee, 75 degrees. It's cooler. Enjoy sunshine in Chicago at 82 degrees because it's going to be hotter this weekend. Thunderstorms could be severe for parts of Montana, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. More on that coming up.
Thanks so much for joining us here on Spectrum News. I'm Bree Driscoll. Today is Friday, June 21st. Our top story, severe weather is impacting much of the U.S. again today. Dangerously hot temperatures are scorching the Midwest and Northeast, while out west, wildfires in New Mexico have killed at least 2 and unleashed intense flash floods. Meanwhile, some Texas cities seeing nearly 3 times their June average rainfall over 48 hours, as Alberto made landfall in Mexico, leaving at least 4 dead. In Corpus Christi, video shows Texas A&M Task Force 1 conducting welfare checks amid knee-deep water. Spectrum News anchor Jenna Enoch.
Oppressive heat leaving Americans searching for any way to cool down.
It's about 100 degrees, it feels like.
And as the heat bears down on the country, those in the Midwest are facing new flooding, while the northern parts of New England are finally looking forward to a cool down. And in New York City, this heat wave may be the longest one they've seen in months. Temperatures are so high in Washington, D.C., the city is slowing its commuter trains when rail temperatures get too hot, as they're face-to-face with temperatures topping 100 degrees for the first time since 2016. And while many battle the heat, others in the South are trying to stay safe as the first named storm of the hurricane season bears down.
On the one hand, we have fire threats. On the other, now we have rain and flood threats as well.
The severe weather in some northern states is leaving many underwater, and so many living there are still recovering from bats of heavy rain earlier this week.
And the water just kept coming in. It was like watching the Titanic sink.
Jenna Enoch, Spectrum News.
President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are set for a showdown next week. The stage is now set for Thursday's CNN presidential debate. Biden is waking up at Camp David this morning. There he's spending the next few days preparing for the debate. Trump holding informal sessions to prepare. Biden winning a coin toss and choosing the podium on the right side of viewers' screens. Trump will have the final word in the debate. Now, this debate will look different from previous years with no audience and microphones being turned on only when it's their turn to speak. And you can watch the CNN presidential debate on Thursday, June 27th on CNN or simulcast right here on Spectrum News. Our coverage will begin at 8:55 p.m. Eastern, 5:55 on the West Coast. Then stay tuned for our Decision 2024 live post-debate special as our team of political experts from across the country provide the debate. It's time now for our political buzz. Joining me now is Jason Fechner. Jason, new fundraising numbers are out, and it appears that former President Donald Trump outraised President Joe Biden again. Jason, let's talk about these numbers.
Bree, good morning. Good to see you. Happy Friday to you. Let's first start with President Biden. $85 million raised in May for himself and the DNC. That is up from April. So good news for the president there. But when it comes to Trump and the RNC, as you mentioned, far outraising the president right now, $141 million for Trump and the RNC in May. That included $53 million in the 24 hours right after his criminal conviction. So that was a big boost to his fundraising totals. The gap essentially closed now when it comes to cash on hand for the two, fundraising ramping up for both. And when it comes to raising money, let's also talk about spending money. President Biden outspent former President Donald Trump in the month of May, spending heavily on ads, spending heavily on staff as well, roughly $30 million for him. That could basically explain his little bump in the polls as of late. finally, some good polling numbers coming in for President Biden. That could potentially help with fundraising now in the month of June. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think it was important that you pointed out there, too, that these numbers are from May when the former president's trial was still going on there. Let's also get into some of the specific donations here, which are really interesting. The super PAC backing Trump received $50 million from Timothy Mellon, and Biden receiving $20 million from former New York City mayor and billionaire Michael Bloomberg. What effect will these giant donations have on the race?
How nice must Timothy Mellon, somewhat reclusive heir to the Pittsburgh banking fortune, $50 million to Trump also in the wake of his criminal conviction. But he's also given $25 million in this past election cycle to the PAC that is supporting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So kind of splitting his money there. Bloomberg, of course, $20 million to Biden. And it seems like a billion years ago that Bloomberg was running against Biden ahead of the 2020 election. But I think it just goes to show that there are some big dollar donors that are out there, some big dollar donors that have waited to this point and are still waiting to decide on whom they're going to contribute to going ahead toward November. So these fundraising totals are ramping up right now, and they're set to ramp up significantly now in the next couple of months.
And Jason, former President Trump making some interesting comments about a proposal for foreign students on a podcast yesterday. Let's take a listen to that.
Is you graduate from a college, I think you should get automatically, as part of your diploma, a green card to be able to stay in this country.
Now, Jason, this seems somewhat contradictory to other Trump stances and even past policies. What do you make of this?
Yeah, as you mentioned, definitely contrasts with the anti-undocumented immigrant rhetoric that we often see through the years and on the campaign trail. Just this week here in Racine, Wisconsin, there were chants of "send them home" coming from the crowd. So very interesting to see how this proposal, if it's an official proposal, if it was something kind of said offhand during this podcast, is reflected in his base there. It came during a podcast called All In with venture capitalists, and Trump was trying to make the argument that we need smart people to stay in the United States. He said, quote, "You need a pool of people to work for your company, and they have to be smart people." So Trump differentiating between them and potentially other immigrants that are out there right now. Very interesting to see, again, how that plays with his base, and very interesting to see how that potentially impacts his poll numbers going ahead over the next few weeks.
All right, Jason, thank you. Next up on Spectrum News, some good news for those who need a passport and fast. We have the details for you in just a bit.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
People count on Spectrum to keep them connected to what matters most. Our commitment runs deep with a fully long. Our commitment, it's local too. We live and work in the communities we serve. Cheer for the same teams, shop at the same stores, and work hard to deliver the best internet, TV, and mobile services. Because, well, we count on them too. We're Spectrum, connecting the places we all call home.
At Spectrum News, we're committed to strengthening the fabric of local communities through our reporting, with stories that inspire and news that matters. Streaming live on your smart TV and connected devices, plus on-demand weather forecasts. It's all there as you step outside with the Spectrum News mobile app, keeping you informed and in the know throughout your day. Spectrum News Plus, local stories, connecting communities. Exclusively for Spectrum customers. Now available on your favorite devices.
I'm meteorologist Julie Marquez with you here on a Friday morning. We're still talking about the heat and the heat wave. There's a risk of severe storms in parts of the country, and we're also watching the tropics. I'll talk more about that in about 10 minutes, but I want to talk about the heat because it has been relentless across portions of the Midwest and the Northeast. Temperature today in Philly's 95, same thing in Washington, D.C. Look at Pittsburgh, Columbus, Indianapolis, St. Louis in the mid-90s, and in some areas it's going to feel near 100 degrees. So we have high heat index values too. Tomorrow, Philly's 97 degrees. We have 87 for Albany, and 92 degrees in New York City, where the heat advisory is in effect through the weekend. And this orange shading on the map, probably used to seeing this. This covers parts of Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, into West Virginia and into New Jersey. These are the advisories for the heat. Some of these last through Saturday night. But we also have heat advisories for parts of California. Areas away from the coast this weekend will experience temperatures over 100 degrees. So Saturday, looking at Bakersfield, California at 108, Palm Springs 110, Las Vegas 110 degrees, Phoenix, also Lake City will be about 97 degrees. Now to take a look at the rainfall coverage, and some of it's going to be very heavy with a threat of severe storms for parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Dakotas, back into areas like New Mexico, Utah, and in Colorado as showers and thunderstorms develop. This is through Saturday at 6 o'clock. We see rain with scattered showers, thunderstorms across portions of the Northeast, and we also have some areas of rain for parts of Florida too. There's a system out in the Atlantic, an area of low pressure, that's going to move toward Northeast Florida today. We'll talk more about that with a look at the tropics coming up.
Well, if you're just joining us or heading out the door, here's a look at what you need to know. Dangerously hot temperatures, intense flash floods. And in Texas, some cities seeing nearly 3 times the June average rainfall over just 48 hours as Alberto made landfall in Mexico. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are preparing for their showdown next week at the CNN presidential debate. Biden readying himself in Camp David while Trump holds more informal sessions to prepare. And the Border Patrol saying arrests at the U.S.-Mexico border are down 25% since President Biden announced new asylum restrictions 2 weeks ago. And that's a look at what you need to know this morning. Lawmakers in Washington are working to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. The resolution coming just one day after Russia and North Korea signed a defense agreement. Spectrum's Aaron Kelly has a closer look at the proposed legislation.
Calling it a key moment in Ukraine's fight against Russia, National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby says the U.S. is redirecting missile shipments to Ukraine. He said the decision is necessary as Russia steps up attacks on Ukraine's power grid. The countries that were supposed to get the now diverted shipments eventually will receive the missiles. The announcement comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
Good morning, I'm Bree Driscoll, and you're watching a special report here on Spectrum News. The Supreme Court just upheld a gun control law intended to protect domestic violence victims. It was an 8-to-1 vote with Justice Clarence Thomas dissenting. I'm joined now by constitutional law professor from Campbell University, Gregory Wallace, and Washington, D.C. reporter Harry Lee, who is outside the Supreme Court. Harry, let's begin with you. Can you break down this ruling for us?
Yes, well, the justices overwhelmingly voted to retain red flag laws. But what's really interesting is how they decision. That came out in 2022. And that said that rather than consider public safety, judges should only consider whether it fits into the nation's history of gun regulation. So that's very interesting. Chief Justice Roberts writes in his decision, since the founding, the nation's firearm laws have included regulations to stop individuals who threaten physical harm to others from misusing firearms. Now, that's really interesting because guns are very dangerous in domestic violence. Guns were used in more than half of domestic violence killings, and more than 70 women are shot and killed each year with guns by their intimate partners. So it's very interesting that public safety does seem to be a big factor, but it was not in the consideration of the judges when they made this decision.
Thank you, Harry. I want to bring in Professor Wallace here now. I want to give a little bit of a background on this case. It does go back to a 1996 federal law that bans the possession of firearms by people. There was this individual, a Texas man, Zaki Rahimi, who in 2020 was under a protective order from his ex-girlfriend and was involved in a series of violent incidents. Police searched his home. They found guns. After several legal challenges, Rahimi going to the Supreme Court saying his Second Amendment rights were violated. We have the decision now, which in part Justice Roberts wrote, since the founding, our nation's firearm laws have included provisions preventing individuals who threaten physical harm to others from misusing firearms. As applied to the facts in this case, Section 9222 fits comfortably within this tradition. What do you make of this decision? Is this a surprise to you at all?
No, it's really not. And I think most people, particularly after listening to the oral arguments in this case, predicted this kind of outcome. Firearms out of the hands of people who pose a credible threat of danger, as the court said, to other people. And so I don't think this case is that surprising.
Justice Thomas writing the dissent saying, in part, in short, laws targeting dangerous persons led to the Second Amendment. It would be passing strange to permit the government to resurrect those self-same dangerous person laws to chip away at that amendment's guarantee. Are you surprised at his words in this case?
Well, I think he was talking about laws that were used by the British government to target political opponents who were used as a pretext. That's not what this law does at all, or at least certainly not at this point how the law has been used. Those persons laws Justice Thomas mentioned were not necessarily people that posed a credible threat of violence to others. The majority opinion here deals with that aspect of this law.
And I feel that with this court as it stands right now, especially referring to the Bruin case that was previously, that there has to be kind of a historical precedent set for their rulings now. It doesn't necessarily have to do as much with public safety as Harry was talking about. Is that correct?
Well, the Bruin test says that for a gun regulation, a modern gun regulation to be upheld, there has to be some either historical twin or historical analog to that particular law that was recognized at the time either of the founding or the passage of the 14th Amendment. Now, I think that's what the court focused on. This is, I think, consistent with Bruin. There's actually another part of the same statute that does allow for a domestic violence protective order to be entered against someone by a court without a showing of a credible threat of violence. The court sidestepped that part of the statute and upheld just the part that where there was a finding of a threat of violence.
That's a very interesting point. Let me bring back in our Harry Lee now. Of course, we are right in the midst of a presidential election. A lot of these decisions are having implications on the presidential race. Do you see this case having any implications?
I don't see this case having a massive impact. Red flag laws are fairly popular. 21 states in the District of Columbia have them. And what I expect to happen here is that Democrats will cheer the decision. Republicans likely remain that the federal government open to support red flag laws in other states. And some Republicans, notably Thomas Massie of Kentucky and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, they did give some pushback against that. Now, they argue that the government has spy tools that it can use to spy on people and put them under these red flag laws and therefore violate their Second Amendment rights. However, I don't see this having a big impact either in Congress or in the presidential election.
And Professor Wallace, let me follow up with you. We had another ruling by the Supreme Court earlier in this session with regard to the Trump-era bump stock ban. How do you look at these two decisions kind of in the same vein? I mean, they're represent two different sides, but coming from the same court here. How do you look at both of these up against each other?
The Cargill case, which was the bump stock Second Amendment, it was about whether the administrative agency, the ATF, had gone too far in interpreting a congressional statute defining machine guns. So that was really more about administrative law and the overstepping by the ATF in imposing upon the congressional statute an interpretation that was simply unreasonable. So this case is about the Second Amendment. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of consternation within the Second Amendment community about this case because of the narrowness of the decision and because the decision rests upon this tradition of disarming people who pose a credible threat of violence to others.
If it had been gone the other way, it of course could have made a lot of waves, but you're saying that the court kind of played it safe here in regards to this decision.
Well, I think the court is applying the historical tradition here as it said it would do in the Bruen case. And so I don't see any, I mean, I was part of an amicus brief filed with the court in which we granted, and this was among Second Amendment scholars, and we conceded the fact that we have this long historical tradition of disarming dangerous and violent people. I don't think there's really any disputing about that.
Harry Lee, let me bring you back in here. There are still several more cases that the court has to issue decisions on. Actually, let me ask both of you about this. We have a lot of other big decisions coming. Harry, can you lay out some of those decisions for us?
Yeah, there are several big decisions still coming down the mountain. One of them is a decision based on whether hospitals can perform emergency abortions when abortions. But two of the biggest decisions that are going to have a big impact on the presidential election are coming out sometime next week. And that's the same week that President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are set to have their first debate. So we're not really sure if the Supreme Court is going to release these before the debate happened. It could have a big impact on that debate, or if they'll wait until after the debate on Thursday night and release it. Now, those two cases are, of course, the Trump immunity case and the January 6th obstruction case. Both of those have to do with the January 6th riot at the Capitol here, and so we'll see if they rule on that before Thursday.
All right, thank you so much, Harry. Professor Wallace, let me ask you, with all your expertise, what do you think is going to happen? If you can read the tea leaves, how do you think the court is going to lay out these decisions? When do you think they are going to issue them?
Well, it's always dangerous to predict, because Chief Justice Roberts has always had concerns about the Supreme Court not upsetting the national debate in the political arena. And so I would not be surprised at all if he did not release the Trump immunity decisions and even maybe the January 6th decisions until after the presidential debate on Thursday. The court usually tries to wrap up its term by the last business day in June. It could be, there are a number of opinions that haven't been released yet, so it could be that the court may go over into their first day or two in July to release these decisions.
And what are you most interested to see? Is it the immunity case? How do you think the court navigates this?
Yeah, I think the immunity case is going to be immunity, so it can affect presidents past and future. You wouldn't want Obama being prosecuted for murder after drone strike on Anwar al-Awlaki, an American citizen in Yemen, or President Biden being sued for violating the Anti-Deficiency Act by the Student Loan Forgiveness Program. So it does inure to protect presidents past and future. That's an important decision. I really am looking for the First Amendment free speech decisions about the internet, about to what extent can the government regulate the internet, and the decision about whether the Biden administration has unduly influenced private internet providers leading up to the election, to last election.
Yeah, so we have a lot coming down. Have this many cases left before the end of the term?
Yeah, I think it is, and I don't know what the explanation for that is, but yeah, it is a bit unusual. Usually there's 2 or 3 big cases left in the last week of the term, but this year it seems like there's a whole lot more.
All right. All right, thank you very much. Once again, the Supreme Court upholding a federal law barring domestic violence abusers from possessing guns in an 8-1 decision. All right, Harry Lee, Professor Gregory Wallace, thank you so much for your insight. And thank you for your time at home for watching. I'm Bree Driscoll. More news right now here on Spectrum News.